are going to be talking about marathon training plans. First, I want to differentiate for you a little bit. The plan itself is your 18 weeks of what runs to do, but there are a lot of different methods to get into, and that's where a lot of people start getting confused. Should they follow Hansen? Should they follow Galloway? What's the difference between all of these, and how do you know which one is right for you? And that's the key, is figuring out which one is right for you. So first, let's talk about how to pick the right plan, and then I'll go through some of the specifics on each of the really popular ones, and hopefully that'll help you figure out exactly what you need. Okay, when you're picking your plan, there are a couple of things to take into consideration. The first one is going to be your current level of training. So if you've been injured, like someone we know, or you've been training consistently for months, that's really going to change which one you pick. You don't want to dive into a super hardcore, intense plan if you actually need a little bit more of a buildup, or maybe it's your first marathon ever and you don't know exactly what to expect. Some of the plans like Hansen or First might be a little more intense than you're truly ready to handle. So evaluate where you are and just be honest with yourself before you pick one of the plans and decide that it's going to be perfect. Which goes to the second point, intensity. This is all about personal preference. Do you love hitting the track? Do you love how a speed workout just leaves you kind of like, oh my God, completely exhausted? Or do you kind of prefer that long run that just leaves you sort of like, okay, I did that, but I'm sort of refreshed and connected with myself? That's a massive difference between a Hansen plan and, say, the low heart rate plan that I detailed for you last week. So know what kind of intensity you prefer in your workouts. That'll really help you too. The next thing to consider is your schedule. So how much time do you realistically have to give to marathon training? You'll see most of the classic plans are going to have maybe 5 days of running plus some cross training, and that's a very normal, classic, typical plan. But some people are like, I just do not have time for that, which is where we're going to dive into the first method of marathon training. First is the name of it, not like number one. And it only has 3 days of running a week. So it might fit better with your schedule, but then it goes back to point number 2 about intensity. So be honest with your schedule, but also what do you enjoy? Do you prefer things like CrossFit and the marathon is kind of secondary? So maybe CrossFit endurance is an option. Things to consider. All right, and the last point we want to consider before we dive into what are the options, your goals. So why are you doing this marathon? Are you doing it because you enjoy running with your friends every weekend and you want to spend time hanging out with them? Are you doing it because this is the time you're going to freaking Boston qualify? They can be two very separate goals. If your friends on the weekend are going to enjoy their long, easy runs, but you've picked a plan that is intense and hardcore, you may not be able to enjoy both at the same time. So that's where it kind of gets down to deciding what's actually the first up is the very well-known Galloway method. So this is the run-walk method. And honestly, I think sometimes it gets a bad rap. People have an idea that to be a runner, you should only run. But that's not true. I have a number of friends who have actually Boston qualified using the run-walk method. And particularly when I lived and trained in Miami, almost everyone used run-walk there. Part of that's because the humidity level being at 90% kind of causes your heart rate just to always be a little bit higher. And by using the run-walk method, they're consistently building in a little break that brings the heart rate back down so they just don't feel like they're overheating or overexerting their bodies all of the time. The Galloway method is fantastic, whether you are starting out or a long-term runner. So don't feel like run walk is something that's not a real runner. That's just not true. You can be extremely fast using that method. It's also one of the best ways to just get started with running, because you are allowing yourself and your body to kind of figure out what feels best. Okay, so that is Galloway, also known as the run-walk method. And in contrast, we have the Hansen method. Hansen is different than most of the classical plans because the longest run you'll do with a Hansen training plan is 16 miles. That's right. So a marathon is 26.2 miles, but the longest run you'll do under their plan is 16 miles. So what gives? What's the difference? In a very standard training plan, your long run may go up to 22 miles, usually 20 for a beginner, but it's at a long, slow pace. So it's an easy pace that you can try to figure out how to maintain for 20 miles. Hansen picks your actual marathon pace to slightly faster for every single long run. There is no easy running in Hansen. It is all high intensity, hardcore. Now, I am gonna provide a link when this is over that's gonna help you see each of these different plans, and I have actually testimonies from people who have used the different plans so that you can see what their results were. How did they feel using the plan? Now, like I said earlier, if you are someone who thrives on intensity, if you hit the track and you were like, oh my God, I feel amazing because I just killed it, the Hansen method may very well just be exactly what you're looking for. I do not thrive in that kind of environment. For me, it's too intense. Every workout is just too hardcore. I want to relax on a lot of my runs. You will not be doing that with this style of training. Something to consider. Okay, our third method is FIRST, which is an abbreviation for basically the Furman Institute. This is where the initial idea of run less, run faster came from. So it is only 3 runs a week. You're gonna have an interval run, a tempo run, and a long run. I have had some friends who had extremely good success with this. Again, you can find that in the link later. But for other people, it just wasn't enough mileage. And I think especially for people who are starting out on that first marathon and you're sort of working to really build that aerobic base and to teach your body how to have enough time on your feet and to mentally handle the endurance. And especially when you hit mile 24 and you need to call back on all those times of running on tired legs, it doesn't work for everyone, but it does work. So again, you've got to figure out what's going to be best for you. So it's 3 runs a week. Really, they don't dictate what happens on the other days. They do recommend cross training, but when you cross train, it will be at high intensity. So it's not going out for a leisurely walk. They want you to do things like sprint intervals on the bike, sprints in the pool, basically any kind of really high intensity on the cross training days. Now, again, this can be super helpful if you've been consistently injured from running. You're going to get in the runs. They have their plans designed in a way to get you to marathon day, but with less miles running, you're not pounding the pavement as much. So you can put in the intensity to those cross-training workouts. We are moving on. So low heart rate training. I did the entire Facebook Live last week about low heart rate training. So I'm not going to dive too much into it here, but it is what it sounds like. It's a easier style of training, if you will, because you're keeping your heart rate below a max threshold. You're building your aerobic base. You're focusing on burning fat for fuel instead of carbs. Okay, last one we're going to chat about, CrossFit endurance. This style of training is really for you, my friends, who have fallen in love with CrossFit and for some reason have decided you would also like to do a marathon. There is very little running involved. Instead, it is basically 5 days a week of CrossFit and then a little bit of running. Their theory is they are training you at such high intensities all the time that when you go out and do those runs at a slower pace, they're going to feel easier. So I've talked to some people who have done this. They quite certainly finished their marathon, but they weren't sure they really had the best time for their marathon that they could have. So I think it really goes back to what I talked about initially, which was, thinking about the things that are important to you when you're picking your plan. So what are your goals? What do you like in terms of intensity? What's your schedule? Really and truly, what is most important to you? All right, as promised, I will add a link where you can find the testimonials from people who have tried these different plans. You can find links to more information about them. And please, let me know what other questions you have. Is there a running topic that you want to make sure I hit on in one of the next Facebook Lives? This is all about you. This is all about the Run to the Finish community and just continuing to give us all a place to connect about this weird thing we like to do. Okay, until later, gang.